McKenna. Make sure my seats are the correct height, so I'm not too high where my knees, where I'm tiptoeing, or too low where my knees are up by my shoulders. I'll first start by positioning the snare, because that's where the centre of the kit is to make sure that's all comfortable. Make sure it's high, just above my where my thighs are, so I don't, as I'm hitting the snare, punch my thighs, because that will damage myself. Then I'll see where my feet land comfortably, and position where the bass drum and the hi-hat stand would be, because I don't want to be overstretching at any given time. So make sure it's all comfortable. Then I'll mostly sort out my floor tom, and I'll make sure that's as close as the similar height to my snare drum, so it's not overstretching any time. I'm all having to lead down, and it's also giving me fluency around the kit. Yeah, and sort out my tom one. I like my tom as flat as possible, because it just gives me that little bit easier reach over my kit. Yeah, and I don't have to really stretch myself. But I always make sure that none of my toms would be touching the rims, because that would interfere with the sound, and also then can potentially damage my kit in the process. If I had this extra tom, I would either have my ride just by my floor tom, or if I was playing some soft music, I would maybe position it where my crash would normally be. But because I've only got one tom, I'll position it over the bass drum, which gives me an easier reach over it. Yeah, and I'll make sure the same, it wouldn't be touching in any given instrument. And if I normally would position the crash just over where my tom is, maybe a tinsy bit over the hi-hat, giving it an easier reach so it's not too far away or not too close where it's starting to interfere with my hi-hat play. If I had another crash, it would just go just to the left, to the right of the ride, and my china would be just under that, to the right of that crash. Any splashes, either just over the ride or by the hi-hat, where I'll be normally easier to accent it. But other than that, that's how I normally have my kit set up.
Okay, just give us a little bit of groove,
okay,
just to make sure that it works. Okay, great. Good stuff, Dom. So if you could just bring the drum stool and just put it down here. Okay, cool. Right, just going to ask you some questions, okay? So Dom, what are the health and safety considerations you should take into account when playing the drums?
First thing is ear protection. And so, because I don't want to be damaging my hearing while playing, and so I can pretty much use either the foam earplugs, which are good but not actually too good, because they will reduce everything, all the noise. So I'd rather go for filtered earplugs, which reduce the decibels but do not interfere with the quality of the sound. So it'd be good for during practice or gigging or rehearsals, or even just going to concerts. So they're generally really good. In-ear monitors, not as good, because they're pumping sound into your ears, and that could damage it even more, especially if you've got a dodgy sound guy who ends up bringing lots of feedback. It could potentially damage your ears more than if you're playing your drums. So other ones are how you're holding the stick. So I would hold it French, but stuff you don't want to be doing is gripping it like that. If you're doing that, putting your pinkies out or anything like that, because that puts unnecessary strain on your hands. Over gripping it, so really hardly tying it, because when you're hitting the drums, it will be just sending shockwaves up your arms. if you're holding the sticks up really high against the tip, you're basically playing with really small thin bits of stick, which will be, you know, short shock waves. You want to be holding it near the butt end of the stick. Heavy lifting, so if you've got a hardware case, you don't want to be lifting it up because it's just a box full of metal. Or if you can get maybe ones with wheels on it, which reduce it, or a couple of people lifting them because you don't want to be damaging yourself off the posture at your drum kit. So you don't want to be sitting slant over because you can get slip disc back, pulling muscles there. You want to be sitting up straight, hands over the over the hi-hat and snare, because you don't want to be sitting down like that, because then you're potentially hitting your arms, your legs, cross-sticking, which just interferes with playing. You can really hurt yourself doing that. And that's all I can really properly think of.
Okay, good stuff, well done. Dom, could you describe your warm-up routine?
Warm-up would be paradiddles. Also, I'd be doing paradiddles from the tom, floor tom to the tom one, with the bass drum involved. I would not at a fast tempo because I don't want to wear myself out. Or if I'm at a gig, I'll be practice pads. So I'll be doing rudiments like doubles, paradiddles, double paradiddles, triple paradiddles, diddles, going through them, but not at really extreme speed. I just want to keep my hands warm. Maybe finger techniques, I may be doing singles, doubles, threes, fours, going up there. And general round the kit, so doing fours around the kit, then threes, then twos, then ones, and then maybe play a small groove, not a heavy one, just enough to make sure I'm all warmed up. Maybe experiment with different bass drum patterns or different snare drum patterns, but nothing too fast, because the sort of stuff I'm playing, I need my energy for it. And you don't want to be going on stage when you're really worn out, because it just takes away from the whole energy of the gig.
Okay, good stuff. Don, when setting up your drum kit like you did before, can you list some of the considerations that you make?
Make sure my bass drum pedals aren't too far, so I can easily reach it. My snare drum isn't too far. If I'm using double bass pedals, I'll make sure the two pedals aren't too close to the snare drum where my legs are gripping the snare drum, because that could hurt my legs, and also it can affect how the snare drum resonates. It's make sure all the cymbals, toms are within reach, so I don't have to lean to get to any, because if I'm leaning to get to stuff, it takes away from my playing, and I'm more thinking about can I reach something than if I can just play it and get the right feel. Make sure everything's kind of at a good height, so it's never too high, not too low, so make sure my snare drum, my floor tom are about the same height, so I can get over it. Toms are flat, but if I can't get them low, they're normally having to be angled towards me, because I don't want to be hitting the rims as I'm going across. Cymbals always normally maximum eye level, which would be kind of flat, but I normally tilt them. If they're any above eye level, I would normally tilt them quite a bit, so the shoulder of my stick can hit it easily instead of hitting the side, which will then potentially crack my cymbals, which I don't really want to be doing.
Okay, good. What drum kit do you play, Dom, and why? Give me the reasons why you play what you play.
I play Yamaha Rock Torch with a Pearl Export snare, which is a 6-piece. Good because it's the actual, the snare was cheap, which is one reason I did get it, and because I couldn't afford the Yamaha Rock Torch snare at that time. But my Yamaha Rock Torch is all mahogany, so it's very big, powerful kit, and it's all fusion size, which is really easy to transport. So it's a 22 by 18 bass drum, 10 by 6 tom, 12 by 7 rack tom, 14 by 13 floor tom, and 16 by 15 floor tom. And which is good to be able to have that 6-piece, but then it means that I can just take bits away if I'm doing certain gigs. It just gives that a little bit extra freedom, so I'm not just stuck with a small kit. I can take bits, and if I'm playing a smaller acoustic gig, I can decide to take the 10 and 14-inch floor toms, but if I'm doing a more rock gig, I can take the 12 and 16 in, and it just gives that a little bit of freedom. The cymbals I use are all Meinl. I've got a MB10 hi-hats, heavy ones, and classic custom extreme metal, all 16, 18-inch crash, 16-inch China,
10-inch splash. I've got a Classics 8-inch China splash, a 20-inch HCS ride, and a 12-inch HCS China as well. Just gives me that extra freedom, and also I can pick and choose which gigs I want to be doing with what cymbals, so I can choose from a range rather than just saying, oh, I've got this limited amount, they give that limited amount of sound. I can just pick and choose what I need from when I need it. My dream kit would be normally a DW custom kit, normally out of Babinga wood, because I really like that dark, warm sound. And I would like the more high-end sort of Bison Dark series, and maybe mixed with the vintage series sort of rides, because I like that sort of washiness over the ride. I don't like a really big pingy sound, and I like a warm tone, dark warm tone to my cymbals. I don't really like the bright, crashy, overpowering sort of ear-deafening music, because I'll be using it for more heavier music. So you riding on that, it can potentially damage your ears, and it just overpowers a little too much. Pedals, I would like Pearl Demonator direct drives, double pace pedals, because smooth, and they feel good, they do. See one with a back, so it's not exactly I would be leaning against it, it's more of a guide to my back, so I know if I'm leaning back, I'm at the right angle, so if I can't feel it, I know I'm at the wrong angle then. And that's really about my size, my cymbals. I like to have a minimum 14-inch crash, maximum 19-inch crash. So I can choose from softer music, I'll be choosing smaller cymbals, louder music, and I can have bigger cymbals because they give that more volume and punchy power to my music. So just a kind of a general range of cymbal range, but kit, definitely finger at the moment. Okay,
good stuff. Dom, list, in terms of drum maintenance, list the regular maintenance that you carry out on your drum kit.
Make sure the tension rods are lubricated so they don't seize up, because if you tune it, if you've got a seized up tension rod, it can really limit the amount you tune in. Make sure your batter heads are not too damaged, and normally every 3 times you change your batter heads, you should be looking to change your resonant heads. If I was looking at my actual bass drum or the shells, I was making sure there's no wood rots, cracking, because that would all affect the sound. Make sure there's no rust on my drums. So if there is rust, I'll have to get rid of that, or if it's too rusted, look to replace it. Make sure there's no cracks on my cymbals, or I don't really normally clean my cymbals because I like that extra tone. It gives it a unique tone. But make sure there's no keyhole in just generally. And so if something's cracked, I wouldn't look to repair it because it would affect the sound. I would either look to buy a different cymbal or replace it. Because I don't like when they normally crack it and they drill massive holes during it, because it just makes it's not the same cymbal anymore.
Okay, you mentioned keyholing. Do you want to describe what that is?
That's when, if you don't have a protector in your on your actual cymbal stand, and the actual thread wears away the actual hole in the cymbal, which then kind of makes it all go tilting funny, and it also affects the bell sound, which can then lead to cracking and all that, and you don't really want that.
Okay, good. Finally then, Dom, there's a snare drum over there. Could you just grab the snare drum, put it onto your lap, and then could you talk me through all of the bits of the snare drum?
So you've got the batter head, which is the side you'll be hitting, in the rim, which holds down the batter head, which helps give that the tension rod itself, of which you use to tune the actual heads, and also holds it down. Normally you would have a washer there just to make sure it helps. You've got the actual lug, which is where the tuning rod goes into. Underneath you have the snare wires. Normally if you're looking at snare wires, most people won't replace them, but if they start getting all loose, then you're looking to replace it. You don't want to over-tension it. The resonant head, which normally if you're tuning the snare drum, you would have the resonant head lower than the batter head. You've got the snare strainer, so that's where you can tighten up your the snare wires how you wish. And it's really about when you've got the shell, which is the actual drum itself, which is normally you can get different woods, or now you can look at different metals like aluminium, copper, bronze, and they're all hammering at different sizes. And the normal size is normally about
14 by 5.5, but you do get like 13 by 7 or different size ones, which normally the 7 ones, the deeper they are, the more kind of lower the tone is. And there's the small ones like the piccolo snares, and they're normally 13 by like 3, which really make that cracky sound, which you can normally use for like, you know, maybe some jazz music, funk music, that sort of stuff. Normally the deeper ones you'll use for a lot heavier sort of music, because that gives that a little bit more boomier sound.
And finally, talk me through the procedure of changing the batter head.
Normally you would undo all the tension rods, take the rim off, take that batter head off, clean round the actual shell itself and the hoop. I would also clean the new head going on there, make sure there's no dust or anything there. Put it on, make sure it's a snug fit so it can turn all the way around without sticking. Put the hoop on, put the tension rods in, tie them up to finger tightness. Then I would make sure there was a pinch technique going around. I would then start cross tensioning and to make sure it's all sounding nice. Then I would after that make sure it's all sounding the same. And then I could put my finger down, undo it to the crinkles, then tighten it up. Then I can choose a note or however tighten it. So I start going around half turns, make sure everything's the same, so I don't have to be going around a full turn, because that will just change the sound. And then, as I said, that will be normally higher than the resonant heads, but if you're tuning, say, a tom, you want the resonant heads higher than the bat heads. And normally the bass drum, you want the lowest possible notes, so you'll be tuning down as low as possible, or without the crinkling effect. But if you can tune it right, you wouldn't need a pillow or anything really in the bass drum, because then it gives it more of an authentic sound, and you don't have to worry about if it falls out of place or if it falls against your bass drum batter head.
Okay, you talked about cross-tensioning. Can you just describe what that is?
That's where you take that side and you kind of make sure that and the cross lug is sounding the same. So you go from there, then you go from the second one there, and you just keep going into that diagonal shape, making sure everything sounds the same. Everything's kind of, there's no one side higher than the others, because this works. If you tighten that side down, it will affect the other side. Because I've seen when you sometimes when people tighten their heads, if there's crinkling that side, they sometimes think they have to keep tightening that down, which is sometimes not the case. You have to tighten down the other side. So it just gives that, you know, a little bit smoother feel, and you kind of make sure it's not going to damage your head, because if you over tighten one side, you're risking splitting your head and spending more money replacing the head, and it also may not sound as nice.
Okay, thank you.